So, part two of Philosophy 81, Hinduism. Um, we covered in part one the stories of the Harappans and the Aryans. We looked at the Vedas, the writings of the Aryans, and their religious beliefs. And we looked at the creation story that comes out of the Vedas. So let's look at some of the Vedic principles and gods that come out of the Vedas. The number one principle that we get out of the Vedas is the principle of righteousness and harmony, which is called Rita. Rita, even though in English it's a name of a person, it is not a person, it is not a god, it is not a divinely created thing. It is a principle that says there's a certain way things have to work in the world and that they need to follow ideas of righteousness and harmony. Everyone and everything must observe Rita, even the gods. So Rita makes social harmony possible. In other words, you would observe ideas that have to do with peace. If you are going to speak, you tell the truth. Your actions must be just actions, and your rituals must follow the correct procedure. So it is a guideline of how we live our life. And it allows there to be changes, so you can be just, but it also avoids chaos. It creates order, and it's not rigid. It's fairly flexible at this point, and can be changing. So everything is following or should be following this principle of righteousness and harmony. Later, that gets replaced with the term dharma, which means sacred duty, and it becomes a set of unchanging rules about what is right and wrong. And it's still an impersonal principle. You have to follow the Dharma. So it starts with Rita, but then it morphs into becoming Dharma. Now, Dharma has a guardian. In other words, it has a god named Varuna who makes sure that people are following the principle of righteousness and harmony. So we had, um, pardon me, we had, I just lost the name uh, of the gods. So we have Varuna, who is also a god, the foremost of the gods, whereas Indra is the king or the chief of the gods. The two of them rule together. Indra protects us against outside threats, but Varuna protects us against inside threats. In other words, threats that would come from uh, somebody being immoral or there being some sort of social disharmony or chaos. And Varuna sees all, knows all, has spies that report to him, and he's kind of like Santa Claus. He knows when you've been good and he knows when you've been bad, and he keeps track of it. And he is very concerned with morality. He himself is highly moral. He always acts with justice and speaks the truth. He punishes antisocial behavior, and he supports authority and the ruler who is following the principle of Rita, and he fights what is called a destructive, or the view is destructive individualism. You don't act for yourself, you act for the community. He lives in the sky and in the water, so he is part of nature, and he punishes those who violate the principle of Rita. And I find this kind of amusing that he punishes through your bodily fluids. So if you have a runny nose, you probably did something wrong. You were unjust or immoral in some way. You know, if you are vomiting a lot, or any of those kind of bodily fluid things, it's because you've done something wrong. If it burns when you pee, then you have done something very wrong, and you probably have. But those are things that are punishments from Varuna. In other words, they're not these natural, like they didn't understand viruses and those kind of things. If you got sick and you had some sort of ailment of bodily fluids, then it was Varuna punishing you. And so what you did is you went to the Artarvans and you got them to do an incantation or a spell that would relieve you of that ailment. And one of the things that they did was they would make offerings to Varuna so that you would be in good standing with Varuna again and he would stop punishing you. So we've got now a sense of morality and how it has to be played out through the principle of Rita, but we also know that there are practical reasons for following the principle of Rita, because again, you don't want those punishments to happen. So on the one hand, we've got Varuna, who is very moral, very upright, very, just keeps his nose clean all the time. He's a great guy. But we also have him paired with Indra, the chief of the gods. And again, the two of them rule together. And he, Indra, is modeled after the Aryan military chief. So he is a great battle god. He is a warrior and he protects against outside threats if people are going to be attacked from other people, or even things like storms and rain. They describe him as a youth as being lecherous, and as an adult he was drunken and boastful and kind of a jerk. But the idea was that he would get all liquored up and have this ego, and he was like, I'm going into battle and I'm gonna kick ass. So he's very different than Varuna, again lecherous and drunken, and those would be two things that Varuna would be against. But it was part of Indra's persona that was necessary in order to make him such a fierce warrior. In fact, there's a story of him fighting the demon of drought named Vritra, and he fights Vritra, who was withholding the monsoons, and won. And so the monsoons returned, and so Indra is seen as the protector of rain. He's not the god of rain; he's the god of thunder, but he's also the protector of rain. And as I mentioned when we were talking about the Vedas, a full quarter of the Rig Veda is dedicated to him. So there were a number of other natural gods or gods of natures that deal with non-social threats. We have Agni, who is the fire god. And one of the interesting things about Agni, since he was the fire god, he could travel on smoke, and he was actually the only one that could go into all three realms back and forth. So he could carry messages from the people and to the people, and that was useful. There's Vayu, the power of the wind, and Soma. Soma's the god of ecstasy and has to do with physical pleasures. But there's actually a plant called Soma that was or could be made into a hallucinogenic drink, and it could give you supernatural insights or hallucinations that would reveal the truth. And in fact, part of the story about Indra is that before he would go into battle, he would drink lakes full of soma tea, and so he would be tripping pretty much and drunk and boastful and go into battle. Uh, so interesting little side note. Worship of the pantheon, so all of the gods, was the solution really to threats, both the social threats and the natural threats. And rituals and sacrifices were the way that you worshipped. They were frequent. Most homes had daily fireside ritual of some sort, whether it was a morning ritual or several times a day, whatever. They were constantly doing some sort of ritualistic practice in honor of the gods. However, what happened is that over time, a period of a few hundred years, the individual gods kind of merged and became more like metaphors than the idea of an actual personified deity. Because what happened is the Brahmins began to question the power of the gods and the effectiveness of the sacrifice. In fact, the Brahmin began to think it was their words and their skills and powers that brought the results. So it wasn't so much the fact that Indra was helping them win a battle. It was the fact that the Brahmins' words set up the universe so that they could win the battles. And this was the view that was beginning to be taught by the Brahmins. It's not actually in the Vedas. Again, it is the Brahmins who began to think that their words were the cause of everything. And so they looked for a word that had power over all things. And that word was Brahman. So BRA, no accent over the HMAN. So Brahman with the accent is the priests. Brahman without the accent and a small b is the words that the priests use to bring about um, the changes that were necessary. So originally it represented a Vedic prayer or a spell, but it came to mean all of the sacred sounds that were collected in the Vedas. Remember, the Vedas were orally transmitted, so they were sounds, and it was those sounds that were those scriptural sounds that were tied to all of the power in the universe. So Brahman became the name for the words, no accent over the A. And then they started to think, again, this was the Brahmins, that also represented the one, essentially God. And they looked for a name for God. And that essence, or that God being, became called, or they called Brahman. Capital B, no accent. So now we're talking about well into the future. It's about 600 Common Era. But we've seen the development of the word Brahman, and it means three different things. Brahman, small b, capital over the, accent over the A, is the class of priests. Brahman, no accent, is the sacred words of the Brahmin priests. And Brahman, no accent, capital letter, is the divine, the absolute, the one, the source of everything that is. It's that essence that began everything, and there's no description of where it came from. It just is. So we've got a story here that is now telling us what had gone on in the Vedas was very important, okay? And the priests who knew the Vedas had memorized them, right? And their words were the ones that had the power. So we've got a group of people, the Brahmin, who are taking charge, creating a worldview that is based on what works for them. Um, and I think if you're looking at that going, well, that was kind of egocentric. Yes, yes, it was. They I don't want to say became corrupt, but they definitely took power, seized power, and put all of it into their hands. They also started to kind of condense the Vedas. They didn't eliminate the Vedas, but they had like an index, I mean, they put together threads according to the topic. Those that thread, or those threads, are called sutras. Sutra, Sutras, is the term that literally means thread. And so you had easy to memorize threads of ideas from the Vedas. That term sutra will come up again in Buddhism, so this is where it comes from. We've got a change now going on. Instead of having or a development here in Hinduism, that instead of having the pure Aryan view, we've got uh, Rita has been replaced by Dharma, and the Brahmins have taken more control. So we now move in. We're talking about the 3rd or 2nd century BCE. So at this point, we start now classical Hinduism. And there are 3 pathways in classical Hinduism. I'm just going to talk about a couple today, and we'll get the last one for next week. But the tradition, or the Vedic tradition, began to give way to what would become the 3 margas. Marga is a word that means path. And the Brahmanic influence became larger, it increased, and they started to prescribe social and moral ideals. And they started writing their own works. And they created first the Dharma Sutras. So if Dharma means your sacred duty, and sutras is thread, then the Dharma Sutras was the book or the collection of your social duties, your moral duties. They were essentially short law books that were not related to rituals. So it was prescriptions that came from the Brahmin on here's how you have to act. It was started around 600 BCE, finished around 200 BCE. And then they spent the next 1,000 years into about 800 Common Era, expanding that and elaborating that into the Dharma Shastras. And the Dharma Shastras became very rigid. They were law books that told you everything. And one of the most famous parts of the Dharma Shastras is called the Laws of Manu. The Laws of Manu go into such detail. I mean, the Dharma Shastras do too, but the Laws of Manu really focus on things like the social duties of women versus men. And it becomes it just extremely sexist. Uh, so with the Dharma Shastras, we have things like um, you have to eat in a certain way. If it's nighttime and a man has to pee, then he has to face, I believe, to the north at night. And if it's daytime, he faces to the south. I think I have that right. I don't have these books with me. Normally, I read a section from the Laws of Manu that give you the full thrust of what it's being said. Unfortunately, I'm recording this video at a time when I'm not allowed to go to my office because of COVID-19, and those books are in my office at school. So I'm just going to have to kind of give you a light version of it. But they governed everything. In fact, not only did they tell you um, which way for a man to face when he was going to pee, but which hand he could use to hold his penis, which hand he would use to wipe himself if he was pooping, and what to do to prepare to poop, and how to cleanse himself afterwards. All of those kind of things. I mean, they just, I'm bringing that up because I find that just exceedingly um, I don't know what the word is. It is just so controlling, right? But the Dharma Shastras and the Laws of Manu were that controlling. The Laws of Manu, I mentioned, had a big section on women, and one of the things that it says is that, well, men will get into the mysterious heavens if they have been good and they have performed the rites properly. Women, however, only get into the mysterious heavens if their Atman, their soul, rides along with their husbands. Women on their own cannot get in. Women are viewed as such lowly beings that the only um, reason that women existed was to produce offspring and to take care of the men. So they suggest that if a woman is truly loyal, that when her husband dies and he's on the fire burning, she, who is still alive, should throw herself onto the fire and burn herself alive. It's a practice called sati, that she should throw herself on the fire, burn herself alive, and then her Atman will ride on her husband's prana, and that way, if he's been good, they'll both be able to get into the mysterious heavens. Otherwise, if she doesn't do that, she's not a good wife. And she will spend the rest of her life wandering the village. If a woman did not have an adult son or perhaps a brother who would take her in, she had no way of providing for herself. She couldn't work, she couldn't farm. She was viewed as, again, support system for the men. And so if there was no man who would take her in so she could support him or help him, then she would leave, just have to live in the wilderness and eat plants. um, in fact, in the laws of Manu, it says that a woman whose husband has died, if she has not practiced, sati, then she might even try and just starve herself to death and never take help from another man and never mention the name of another man, never look or think about another man. And if she does, she will be reborn into the womb of a jackal, and her next life will be spent as a jackal. So it's a pretty horrid situation unless you die with your husband, which is also a pretty horrid situation. But we get a set here of really, really rigid religious laws that set your class laws and your gender roles, and any change in that now is seen as destructive. You must follow the Dharma Shastras, and you must follow the laws of Manu, or you know that's it. If you're a male, you won't get into the mysterious heavens, and if you're a female, well, you're pretty much screwed regardless. All of this was held up or maintained by what we can call the central pillars of Hinduism: the idea of rebirth or reincarnation, karma, and the caste system. So the caste system, spelled Caste. We had that with the Aryans, right? There were the Brahmins, the warriors, and the general population. But now it becomes very important and very rigid. You were born into the class that you must stay in, and there was no flexibility. You couldn't change class. And the classes were ranked according to uh, the estimation of purity and dignity. So basically, the idea was that in a previous life, you had a certain class and created some karma, which we'll go on to talk about. And so in your new life, when you are reborn, you are placed in a position that's based on what you were like in your previous lives. So if you were bad in a previous life, you would drop down classes. You might even drop out of the human class and become, an animal, or a reptile, or a fungus. If you had been good in previous lives, then you could rise up. And surprise, Brahmins were seen as the highest class. So if a person was a Brahmin, it was because he or she in a previous life or several previous lives had been very good, and they were very moral and powerful people. So we have four classes now instead of the original three that the Aryans had. And then we have actually a fifth class that isn't part of this, what are called the Varnas, or the four colors. They are the four classes. So this last one is so low, it's not even considered part of the caste system. So at the top, we have The Brahmins, again, priests, medical professionals, um, these people that were responsible for maintaining the Vedas. Below them, we have the Kshatriyas, and this is probably a place where you want to have either your glossary or your book open so that you can look it up. And I believe, let's see, the list of these classes is on page 42, so you can see what they, how it's spelled. But the Kshatriyas were the rulers and the warriors, so kings or, other ruling organizations. In today's terms, it would be people like presidents and kings and CEOs. It would also include probably cops and firefighters because they are warriors. And of course, it would include the military. And then on the third of the top three is the Vaishyas. The Vaishyas would be the general population. These would be people that are traders, merchants. They, maybe they are, they sell things or they transport things, those kind of things. They have, some sort of business. These top three are referred to as highborn or twice-born because they are in the top three because they've been born at least one time before and were good people then. So this time when they're reborn, they're in a higher class. Then the fourth Varna is considered the lowborn. It may be their first life, or they may have had, issues with morality in previous lives. These would be what we would call the menial class, the manual laborers, farmers, but not butchers, but people who grow crops. Um, not they're not seen as morally tainted. In other words, they're not bad. They just have not been born or good in a previous life. And interestingly, the Brahmin can demand service by the Shudras at any time. Like, if a Brahmin has been shopping and sees a Shudra on the street, and the Brahmin can say, "Come over here and carry my things," because the Brahmin, again, top of the class, and the Shudras are the bottom. Now, for these four classes, there can be men and women of both class. So a Brahmin man would want to marry a Brahmin woman, and she is a Brahmin woman because she was born into a Brahmin family. Same with the Kshatriyas. They would, a Kshatriya male would marry a Kshatriya female, and then they would have Kshatriya children who would, continue the class line. So you had to match. You couldn't marry outside of your class. You had to stay in your class. Even if you didn't like it, that's where you were. And the reason you were there is because of your karma, which means what happened in the past has put up a certain energy around you that is playing out now. And I'm going to go into detail, but I have one more of the classes kind of. The last and the very bottom are the outcasts. It's where we get the word outcast. Today, they're actually usually referred to as Dalits, Dalits. These people are not even considered part of the caste system, hence the word outcast. And these would be people who have a life that is so low that they do all of they're fishermen and sewer workers, and they handle the dead bodies. Interestingly, if a Brahmin or Kshatriya or one of the highborn dies, it is a Dalit or an outcast who takes care of handling the body and preparing it for the fire. The outcasts would also have jobs like butchers or liquor sellers, because you're not supposed to drink. And roughly 15 to 20% of the population in India today are Dalits. You see Slumdog Millionaire, you see various stories about modern India, and you see a lot of the poverty and the poor conditions that people are living in. And essentially, they are showing you the life of the Dalits, and perhaps some of the Shudras, but it is not a good place to be. If you complain about it, there's a problem. Again, we'll talk to that. One of the other things about the outcasts of the Dalit is they cannot live in a village. They can't live in the village, or they can't enter the village after dark. So they have to live separate from the people in the four Varnas, the four higher caste members. Um, they can't enter the village after dark, because if, let's say, a Kshatriya, a Vaishya, bumped into them, then they would become defiled. And they might even not know that they have bumped into an outcast. And so now they would be impure and not know that they had to do the purification ritual to rid them of the stank of the outcasts. So you've got the classes and the outcast. You are there and you are born into that particular group because of karma. So karma, I know you've probably heard the term, but it is a moral force that puts you where you need to be. Now, it's not a total, like, karma makes this decision. Karma is a force, not a being. It's not a god, okay? But essentially, it is this force that measures the morality, the good and the bad actions that have been with you in each and every life. When you do good things, good energy is around you. When you do bad things, bad energy is around you. So when you are about to be reincarnated, the laws of karma weigh out your good and bad and make a decision, essentially, that puts you into the family or the caste that gives you the best opportunity to better yourself. In other words, it gives you a chance to work out your karmic debt. If you had been a bad person in a previous life, it might put you into a new life where you suffer the things that you suffered, or that you caused suffering to in other people in a previous life. It also might put you into a place where you get to reap the good things that you did in a previous life. There's a goal, basically, of trying to put you or create good karma and have more good around you, because then you will rise into a better class next life and life after life, and you will have a better life. It's really hard to tell um, how karma is playing out. Like, is it you being punished for something that you did in a previous life, or is it karma trying to help you make up for something you suffered in a previous life? My example, my personal example, is that I was talking to a friend years ago about this, and I said, I've had trouble with my weight all of my life. So it must be that in some previous life, or several previous lives, I was really hateful to fat people, because I'm suffering things because of my weight now. So it must be me making up for the bad karma that I created then. I'm working that out. And she said, maybe, or maybe in a previous life you starved to death. And in this life, karma is giving you an abundance of food to compensate for the starving and the suffering that you had in a previous life. Personally, I like her version much better than my version, but the thing is, you don't really know. What you do have to know and accept is that one way or another, karma is playing out. And the life you live now is a result of karma from not only this life, but previous lives. So if you are born into what you view or would view as a crappy situation, like you're an outcast, it's your own fault. You are here And you are here in this bad position to correct your past wrongdoings, your past bad karma. And if you complain about it now and you're like, oh man, I hate working in the sewer, whatever, like you're working in the sewer and you're standing knee deep in crap and you've got a shovel and you're digging it out, right? And you're like, oh man, I hate this, right? That dissatisfaction with your place that has been determined by karma will result in next life, making you even lower. So next life, you might be born a human and a Dalit, and you're not just standing up to your knees, you're like up to your chest in crap, trying to dig that up. You might even be um, born, like I said, an animal or an insect or. So the idea is wherever you are, whatever place you're born into, you need to be the best you can be. If you are a cockroach, be the best cockroach you can be. I don't know exactly how that plays out. Don't remember from when I was a cockroach. But as a person, and we have some memory of, or awareness, and certainly rules to tell us now from the Dharma Shastras how to be the best person we can be, our goal should be to carry out our Dharma, our sacred duty, be the best we can be, and climb up the ladder of the caste system. Okay, that sounds good, and it's an idea that is part of Hinduism today. However, there became a problem, or they realized that even if you are reborn every life as a Brahmin, like you're just good every life and you're a Brahmin, 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 you were still having to go through the rebirth or the re-death cycle. Like you were constantly in a state of dying because from the minute you are conceived, you're working towards your death. Then you die and you come back and you do it all over again. And so they saw that as a problem, right? That this endless rebirth cycle, this endless cycle of reincarnation was a problem. And so they were looking for release or liberation from that cycle. Liberation from the rebirth cycle is called moksha. Moksha, or Moks with an accent A. Moksha. So moksha is liberation from the rebirth cycle. In order to get liberation, they started trying to formulate an idea or a plan for ending it. And what they came up with is called the Karma Marga. Remember I said there were three paths: the Karma Marga, the Jnana Marga, and the Bhakti Marga. Well, this is the first one. It's the words karma, right? And marga. Marga is path. Karma is the actions attached to you. Also, thoughts create negative and positive energy. But the karma marga originally meant living a way that fulfilled your sacred duty, your dharma, and then later it became an attempt to achieve moksha. I mean, the idea was that if I stop creating karma and burn off all my old karma, then when I die, I'm not going to have to come back and work out anything. So the Karma Marga then becomes the first of the classical forms of Hinduism. We're now talking Hinduism, not Vedic period. And the Karma Marga says, well, what I need to do is follow the proper stages of spiritual effort, the proper stages of life. For a man, there's no plan here for a woman, but follow the proper stages of life. It's called the ashramas. That's the name for the list. And you start off as a student, a young man, and you're going through school until you become, or a young man. Then you become a householder, and as a householder, you would have a wife and start raising your family, and then train your family to take over the job of whatever it is that you did, that kind of thing. And then when you're retirement age, you would become a forest dweller. Now, forest dweller, um, a man who has decided to become a forest dweller is seeking moksha. I mean, that's his goal. He wants to not come back. He wants to be done with the physical life, and he wants to actually dwell in the mysterious heavens forever with the ancestors that are there. And so what he does is he has a big ritualistic party, you could call it, where he has his family members all come and he gives away everything. If he has a son or sons, they get the bulk of it. But he gives away all of his things, all of his household, even his house. So his wife, still screwed, basically, because she now has to go find some place to live where hopefully some male relative will take her in. Anyway, after he's finished giving it away and expressing his desire for moksha, his son, his oldest son, and he walk to the edge of the village. And once they get there, the son turns around and walks back home, and the father walks towards the forest, hence the name Forest Dweller. He heads for the forest, and he is not supposed to think about his home or his family, not even his children, ever again. He goes into the forest, and there in the forest, he lives a life that is, you know he doesn't try to create any karma. In other words, he doesn't hunt or kill plants because they are a living thing, right? So he eats only what people donate to him, and they do it willingly, and he spends his time studying and thinking about the religious scriptures and the Dharma Shastras and so forth, and living a completely perfect life, so that eventually, with his proper ritual production uh, and what's called puja, which is worship, especially like an image, or so a picture or a statue of a particular god. With proper ritual, proper social conduct, and they're actually supposed to be pretty much alone, but they often lived in small communities of 3 or 4 where they could discuss the scriptures. And by doing all of that and worshiping, they could create no bad karma, but keep creating good karma. And so they would eventually equal out. After the man had been a forest dweller and he was fully devoted, he became what's called a sannyasi. The sannyasis are the ones that are very, very devoted to following the practices of this forest dweller life. We get from them ideas of yoga, for example. Yoga comes from the sannyasi practice. And yoga is one of those things where you are not doing it for health like people do it today. The idea was to put yourself into physical discomfort, I guess you could say, to show that you didn't care about your body. The body was just a vessel of your Atman, your soul. And so it meant nothing. If you starved to death, that was okay. You don't want to create bad karma. So they would have the bed of nails where they'd lie on the bed of nails, with all the puncturing in the back. And, they would hang upside down and all these different things, besides the yoga poses, that renounced the world. I'm not part of this physical world. I am now only in the spiritual world, and I'm going to eliminate my karma. And when I eliminate my karma, and I'm balanced, when I die, I will not have to come back. I will achieve moksha. So, good idea. And that's what they worked on in the first path. But then they realized that the accumulation of karma is finite. You could only have so much good karma. So if you're looking for a final liberation, which is infinite, right? A finite amount of good cannot produce infinite reward. And living in the mysterious heavens with the ancestor was a reward, basically. So you had to have, unlimited good karma, which was not achievable. They realized then that the noble actions alone, the good karma creation, cannot bring liberation. We need something else. So karma marga is a beginning point. So you still must use it in conjunction with the other pathways, um, in that you need to live this pure life. You would hopefully become a sannyasi, those kind of things, but you needed to move on to some other method to find moksha or salvation, because karma marga alone wasn't going to get it. So then that brings us into chapter 3, which is the next path, the way of knowledge. So the way of knowledge says, I want moksha, I want liberation, but now the primary problems shifted from controlling the natural world in general and moving towards controlling their destinies. In other words, they were very focused on, I am living a good life, but I am living this life aimed at moksha. And that became like everybody practicing the way of knowledge. This is what I'm going after. So they decided that, well, controlling the physical body would not do the job, right? So what about knowledge? So they're specifically talking about spiritual knowledge. So sacrifices gave no lasting solutions, rituals gave no lasting solutions, depriving yourself of all the worldly goods didn't give lasting solutions. Perhaps then knowledge would. And now we get the second path. It's called the Jnana Marga, spelled with a Jnana-Marga, Jnana Marga. And we're talking about roughly 600 BCE. So it's not centered on rituals and social duties like the Karma Marga was. It's looking for internal answers. I'm going to look for secret wisdom through mystical experiences. I'm looking for this mystical, esoteric information. I'm looking for mental disciplines or fixing, my mind and what I'm doing with it. And it will give me what I need. In other words, once I have this knowledge and I understand all of it, I will find liberation. But what is that knowledge? Well, there was a writing that was developed, again, by the Brahmin, in the roughly 600 to 200 BCE period, called the Upanishads. Upanishads simply mean secret teachings. These writings were viewed as revealed. In other words, they were God-given. And so they were canonized. And remember, that means that they were incorporated into the official doctrine. So now, instead of just having the Vedas, we now add another writing, the Upanishads. But the problem with the Upanishads is that they are only understood by those who meditate. Like, you can read them, and it can be like, okay, yeah, makes sense. But until you go into a deep meditation and understand it, you don't really understand it. So the people who followed the Upanishads are actually the people who understood the Upanishads and began to understand the Upanishads were the forest dwellers, because, they spent all their time meditating and studying the various religious texts. So they meditated on it and came up with a brief description that said this is the culmination of the wisdom of the Vedas. In other words, it is all of this, all of everything that was contained in the Vedas and then the Dharma Sutras and the Dharma Shastras and so forth. And it is put together into the secret teaching of the Upanishads. And because of that, it also gets called the Vedanta. Vedanta means the Veda's end, and it's a primary scripture today. So it's a primary scripture that says, look, you don't have to go back and read all of the Vedas and everything. Read the Upanishads and meditate upon them and become a forest dweller and then a sannyasi. And when you do, you will get the secret teachings and understand it. And so this Vedanta tradition became the primary method of the Jnana Marga. Now, around 800 Common Era, 1,000 years or so after the Upanishads were written, a man named Shankara, who was a sannyasi, went into this particular study of the Upanishads and meditation, and he grasped the knowledge. And instead of staying a sannyasi, he came back and told people. He said, look, there is a distinctive type of mystical experience that comes through meditation. It's called samadhi. Samadhi is this very deep, deep meditation where you basically separate from your body and commune with pure spirit. Okay? And when you're there, you see things that you see through things that used to blind you. In other words, you see specific um, supreme knowledge. So you cut through the diluted knowledge that is the empirical knowledge of, oh, this is, a real thing and that's solid and whatever. And you move beyond that to pure spiritual knowledge, or what they call supreme knowledge, or paramartika. Paramartika is gained only through direct input into the soul and into the consciousness of the soul. It is put there because, or not because, it is put there by the essence that is the entire world. And we already know that's called Brahman with a capital B. Basically, you commune with Brahman and you see all things. So you gain this through your soul, not through rational thinking at all. And you understand then that there is a unity of all things. This is where things get a little bit tricky, you might say. It's a view called monism, or monist, M-O-N-I-S-T, and it's the view that there is only one thing. There's not you and other things. Okay? There's no time, there's no change, there's no body that is separate from anything else. There are no things. Those are all false pluralities. There is only one thing, Brahman, with a capital B. And Brahman is not only the essence of the pure world or the entire world, but he is pure spirit. So we say that he is an empirical nothing. In other words, there's no physicalness to him, or it. I'm sorry, it's an it, right? Although they refer to him as him. An empirical nothing, but it gives essence and being to everything. It is the whole phenomenal world contained in this one thing, and there is nothing separate from Brahman. It's, the book will tell you it's indescribable. So I always have a hard part describing it, of course. It's indescribable. But you experience it through samadhi, the deep, deep meditation. The illusion of separateness is called by a demon named Maya. I'm sorry, not a demon. My bad. I'm thinking about Buddhism. So Maya is a cosmic factor, not a demon. And Maya means illusion. So we are ignorant of Brahman as the entirety of everything, right? The only thing, the one thing, we have been fooled into this illusion of believing that we are separate from Brahman, that we are separate from others, right? We have begun to, or not begun, we have seen these things as being reality when actually the whole time we're being fooled by the cosmic factor of Maya or illusion. So on the one hand, we say Maya is not real because Maya is not included as part of Brahman. But it's also not unreal or separate from Brahman because there's nothing separate from Brahman. That's where it starts to get weird. So I want to read you a little section here. It's on page 61 that I find amazing. Let's see here. Let me just get to this. Okay. 61, right-hand column, and at the top it starts to talk about Maya and explain Maya. But near the bottom of that second paragraph, it says, it talks about Maya. It says, clearly Maya is not nothing because it acts with catastrophic consequences. Neither real nor unreal, Maya is a unique entity that is the cause of all human sin and misery. It is the supreme impediment to our salvation. It causes individuals to appear separate, to believe in their separateness, and to act selfishly. And so the thing is here that since we think we're separate and we're an individual, we do act selfishly, and that is the cause of all the problems. It causes a material world to distract souls into love and hate for its figments. In other words, it causes a solution that makes me think things exist. And I'm like, oh, I love my pencil, whatever it is, and I will fight you for my pencil. Problems. And this is the best sentence ever. It binds illusionary individuals to illusionary bodies and illusionary worlds and to illusionary responsibility for their illusionary acts. You can read it yourself over and over because it's an impactful sentence. But basically what it's saying is, you don't exist, I don't exist, nothing exists but Brahman. We don't have actions because we don't we don't exist to have actions. It's all an illusion. And therefore, there's no karma. That's the illusionary responsibility for our actions. We don't have to try and eliminate karma. There is no karma. It's also an illusion. Think about that for a minute. So, it's all an illusion. I am Brahman. You are Brahman. Actually, there's no I and there's no you. Everything is Brahman. Once I experience samadhi and I grasp that, that's it. I see the truth. I don't have to fight karma. I don't exist. I'm in an illusion. And when I see through the illusion, I am no longer deluded. I recognize I am Brahman. I'm done. Now, how does that play out? So if a sannyasi is actually, meditating and understands that, what happens when they realize that? Well, hard to know. I'm still in the illusion, so I still see them and think that they're there. It's quite possible that since they've seen through the illusion, they are gone, and there's some sort of illusionary thing that I'm still seeing because they were never there in the first place. It was all part of my illusion. This gets kind of trippy, doesn't it? But the idea is going to be that I need to desire to end the ignorance that sees things as separate. I need to become a sannyasi, a forest dweller, and renounce the world. And I need to do it at some point in some lifetime. It's not one of those things like, oh my God, everybody's going towards this. Nope, nope. It's up to you. When you want to achieve liberation, when you want moksha, you will practice this. And I need to practice the karma marga to prepare me for this supreme knowledge of the Paramatika and achieving samadhi. So I would have severe removal from the world eventually. I would meditate seriously and study the Vedanta or the Upanishads. I would have to have a sincere desire for final liberation. I would also work on perfecting the five moral virtues of nonviolence, truthfulness, honesty, freedom from greed, and chastity. Chastity is there because women are seen as the primary temptation that causes you to believe there is a separate being. And I can start perfecting that while I'm still in the world. So maybe I'm a householder and I haven't become a forest dweller yet. I can live a life that is pure and good and follows the five moral virtues. But once I've done that, and at some point I become the forest dweller, I've helped prepare. I also would, once I become a forest dweller or sannyasi, like I mentioned, start the physical disciplines of yoga, the meditation. I'd forget about the body. I would, I would have a mind or an attitude of serenity and mental calmness. Another forest dweller of sannyasi might help me. They're called gurus, and that just means spiritual teacher. So your guru might give you what's called a mantra. A mantra is a sound that you would use while you're meditating. The most common one is um, um, so you would make that sound and see it as the seed sound of the universe. It's the sound of Brahman. And you would meditate until you achieve the the mystical merging in samadhi with Brahman, and you become enlightened to the reality of the universal consciousness. There is no separate mind. There is one mind. It is Brahman. You are Brahman. You lose your sense of self. You stop your self-serving actions. No karma is created because karma didn't really exist. If you had some bad karma, it would burn off. And when you die, you will die for the last time. So that's the Jnana Marga, and that's the second pathway. A lot of people today still practice it. You can see on page 63 in your book, you see this fella here. You can't see him. The camera gets it. There we go. The sannyasi. And he's sitting by a lake meditating very, very... Oops. How do I bend? Oh, I got the wrong page. Okay. There he is. He's sitting very still. And if you look at him, it looks like his arms are resting on his knees. Now, they're not. They are, the one arm is outstretched, just holding it in the air. And the second arm, the closest arm, oops, this one is also just resting in the air, outstretched, not quite so far, and he holds it like that. He may have been sitting there for hours or days, because the body doesn't matter. These sannyasis develop a practice where they are able to control their breathing, they control their heart rate, they control their bowels and their bladders, and they can sit for days without any output, not needing any input, with a very slow heart rate. And again, holding arms out. If you do it right now and you hold it out after a couple seconds, you're like, okay, I'm tired. But they would do it for, hours, days. Still do. In the picture in front of him, there's a little bowl kind of thing. That's his begging bowl, because they do eat, but they only eat what's given them. So what they would do, or what they do is stand by a town or a village, and they have their begging bowl, and they just stand there. And if somebody comes up and puts food in their bowl, then they eat. And if nobody does, then they don't eat. And people come up and do it and give them the food because it is good karma for the person who's donating the food. The downside is they get good food and they get bad food. And so that, I mean, it's not like they can complain. They're happy with it because they've reached a place where they realize that I am I require this for nourishment. I need nourishment to provide for my body until I have reached the spot of enlightenment or liberation. And so it doesn't matter if I like it or if it tastes good or bad. I'm grateful for it. So the Jnana Marga is a difficult path. Even if you don't become a sannyasi, it's a difficult path to try and perfect the virtues and to realize that nothing is real. Because when you live with the attitude that nothing's real, people get freaked out because they become attached to the ideas of individuality. They like knowing that they exist. They like being someone. They don't want to think that their children don't exist or their dogs, in my case. Um, they, they like their cars. They like their houses, and they don't want to think that's not real. So most people who were Hindu then um, began looking for the third path, the Bhakti Marga. And that's what we will do for next week. So that's it for today. You've gotten the first two margas or paths of classical Hinduism and the beginnings of pre-Hindu. So we'll catch the rest next time.